All right, welcome everyone. Om Gyantimirandasya, Gyananjana Shalakaya, Chakshuru Militamena, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So, we were born in the darkness of ignorance, but the spiritual teacher has come with the torchlight of knowledge and opened our eyes. Therefore, we offer our respects to such a teacher. So, we're covering Bhagavad Gita. We'll be looking at chapter 2 verses 31 through 37, which if you have a book or you have your phone, you can look up. We're going to be studying that chapter. There's a recap back in verse 2.7. This is a verse where Arjuna actually surrenders to Krishna, or the student surrenders to the teacher and has prepared himself for receiving spiritual knowledge. So there in that verse, Arjuna said two very important statements. Karpanya dosha uparata swabhava. This means my swabhava, means one's sense of identity, is afflicted by the fault of karpanya, which here means ignorance. So my sense of identity is afflicted by ignorance. Indeed, the loss of the family members, etc., on the battlefield represent the loss of the self, because we often identify with the things that are connected to us, family, objects, and so on. Just like sometimes you see people in these romantic relationships, they speak all nonsense like you complete me. All sorts of crazy talk goes on. All crazy talk. How will I live without you? Easily. So, and indeed, when there's breakup in a romantic relationship, a person may have this problem. They say, Karpanya doshoru parata sobhava. Their girlfriend leaves and they feel that their sense of identity is afflicted by law. I don't know who I am anymore. Without them, I don't know who I am, how I exist. This is the same problem, actually. It's a problem it's an existential crisis. I often tell the story for those of you who've come to my classes for a while. When I was 17, I first moved to New York, and I was living with my cousin and a couple of roommates we had. So one of our roommates, his girlfriend of 7 years, had just broken up with him. So he was sleeping in the bed for the whole month, hardly moving. He would just get up to go to the bathroom. In the evening time, he would take a little bit of something to eat, like yogi, I always say. So I remember asking my cousin, I said, what's wrong with him? And he said his girlfriend has broken up with him. So I said, why don't you just get another one? I was like 17, no romantic relationship. So I was like, isn't that what you do? You break up, get another one. Like, what's the big deal? And he said, you'll know when you fall in love. And I said, if that's what love looks like, I don't want to fall in love. That's the culmination of love. So someone is very invested. Someone's invested their sense of identity into that relationship. And when it's broken, they feel a loss of the sense of self. So Arjuna is experiencing a similar loss of his sense of identity. It's an existential crisis. And therefore, he's admitting that I don't know who I am anymore because of this imminent loss that's going to take place. And then he also says to Krishna, Prichami Tvam Dharma Samudachetaha. So Dharma Samudachetaha means I don't know. I'm bewildered about what is my duty. What am I to do in this particular situation? So this is problem of ethical problem. This is a problem that we're always met with also in there. What is the right thing to do, A or B? I've given the example before to try to give us a sense of the dilemma of Arjuna. Suppose you are on one yacht. Yeah, you go on the yacht to enjoy, and then some accident happens and it's sinking. And you have two options. Option A, you save your family members, but 2,000 people die. Or option B, you can save 2,000 people, but your family dies. Like somehow the scenario is working out like that. Then what option do you choose? Of course, if you're Western, it might be easy because you don't like your family or something like that. But suppose you find your family near and dear, like very close, you're attached to them. And you have option between 2,000 lives saved and 3 people killed, or 3 people killed, or 3 people saved and 2,000 lives killed. Then which option will you choose? Very difficult. You don't have the answer because it's just like, it's hard to answer such a question. isn't it? It would be a very difficult scenario. So this is called this is a problem of ethics. What is the right thing to do? So Arjuna is also expressing 2.7, dharma samudiceta. I do not know what is the right thing to do. So his conflict is twofold, an inner conflict and an outer conflict. The inner conflict is existential, a sense of loss of identity or self. And the outer conflict is the ethical one. This is the conflict that all souls suffer in this world. A sense of identity, or the inner conflict, and then a sense of what is the right thing to do, an ethical conflict. So Krishna, answering this first part, the inner conflict or the existential conflict, he has spoken 2:11 through 30. So we've already covered that section. Basically, he was like, chill out, you're an immortal soul. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to be lost. You're imperishable. You're indestructible, and so on. Just like when our friend comes, what will I do without them? Chill out. You'll continue to exist. Because it is like this. People have this sense of like a loss of existence. No, you'll continue to exist because you're imperishable. But to speak of the loss of that relationship, even the loss of the whole world, you'll continue to exist. That was the teaching there. Because you are an immortal soul. The interesting thing about hearing knowledge about consciousness is different from matter is that knowledge generally inspires renunciation from the world. Once you come to understand that you're different from the world, there's a difference between the soul and matter, or the body and mind, and the soul, the self, the Atman, the Purusha. Then you realize that this world is very ephemeral, like a dream. It's actually quite interesting. When you dream, you actually forget about this reality. This reality ceases to exist while you're in a dream mode, isn't it? You don't exist as Tiffany or Daniel or Ankit or Harsha or Matthew or Kevin or Hadini Shakti or UC. You don't exist as that. You exist as like a fish. You know, sometimes you're swimming or breathing underwater, or a bird, or you exist as some other existence. And in that other existence, depending on the level of the dream, sometimes the dream is very engaging. I don't have that's not a pun. I don't mean that's a pun anyway. Sometimes the dream is very engaging. You deeply identify with the dream. You have like aspirations. You may have family members, and you know it's like very deep. But then when you wake up, it's nothing, and then you become preoccupied with this waking life. And then when you go back to sleep, this life that you take so serious now also becomes nothing. And then you become preoccupied in the dream life. The only constant factor in both the waking state and the dream state is the witness of both. That witness is the imperishable soul. So that oftentimes when one hears this sort of spiritual knowledge, it inspires renunciation from the world. The world is insubstantial. It is without substance. Therefore, why become engaged with it whatsoever? And indeed, that is not an improper conclusion necessarily. People from such conclusions, they would become monks living in a monastery, or they may go off into the forest traditionally and just practice yoga, realizing, yes, the soul is different from this world. Why become involved with the world whatsoever? But what's interesting about Krishna's take on this spiritual knowledge is that he's using it to convince Arjuna to fight in the war. So this is the unique presentation of Krishna's teaching in this very important section of the Gita about the difference between matter and spirit. He's trying to get Arjuna to understand spirit, to convince him to actually fight in the war. We'll definitely discuss this more throughout the Gita. How does this spiritual knowledge inspire proper action? But in any case, the point is that the fault that Arjuna is suffering in the form of his existential crisis, the inner conflict, the sense of loss of self, was answered by Krishna in this section, that you're an immortal soul. And that sense of identity is actually the non-self. In fact, that non-self cannot be sustained whatsoever. It is here today and gone tomorrow, just like a dream. So therefore, you should identify with the soul, and you should make decisions from the reference point of that identity. I gave this example last time, just as if you say 2 + 2 = 5 in the beginning of some complicated formula, then whatever you do after that, you come to the wrong conclusion because you made the mistake in the outset. So similarly, if you identify yourself with the non-self, this body and mind, I am black guy, tall, dancer, I'm an artist, I'm this type of person. And then you make all your decisions based on that. Just like sometimes, you know, I'm cool. Just like one of the most cherished spots in high school, most coveted spots was to be the class clown. That was one of the most coveted spots. You know, you wanted to get that recognition in your book that you were the class clown. You know, and because of that identity, you would do stupid things just so that you can maintain that sense of identity. You know, whatever, spitballs and all sorts of making fun of people while the teacher's trying to teach something very important and so on. Just to maintain it, because that one misconception, you try to do things to meet that identity. Misconception is so powerful. One misconception, we'll just pick of many. If you have one misconception, just like suppose you're looking for Bhakti Center and someone tells you it is in West Village. It is in the East Village, but they say it is in West Village. And so with that one misconception, all your energy goes to looking for it in the West Village. And it is misconceived. So one misconception is very powerful to misdirect all your life energy. What to speak of 2 or 3 or 4 unlimited misconceptions. So Krishna is saying here, you should make decisions from the reference point of the soul. Then your inner conflict will start to gradually be solved. So dharma samudachetaha, that is the outer conflict, the ethical conflict. So in verses 31 through 37, he begins to address this question that Arjuna had about the ethical conflict. I'm confused about what is my actual duty, my actual dharma. So we'll look at this set of verses right now. This is 31 through 37. I gave that little background because we have a few notes here. Is everything clear? Crystal. All right, so I'm just going to read the verses because we have a few participants online as well. So this is verse number 31, and I'll read up to 37. So he says here, sorry, it's not in that book, but Harsha may be pulling up. You can share with him. I guess I have to bring Gitas here in the future. We can have like a set of Gitas we could use for, that would be nice. Verse 31 through 37, I'll just read the English here. Considering your specific duty as a ksatriya, you should know that there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles. And so there is no need for hesitation. O Partha, happy are the ksatriyas to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors of the heavenly planets. You said, why that,
When he said, to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought.
Yes. Just like, I don't know about you, but probably many of us guys, we grew up in the martial arts movies. And you used to see this sort of thing in the martial arts flicks all the time. Some warrior comes in, you know, trying to strut his stuff. And he's like, very nice. And he feels ecstatic because he gets the opportunity to fight. The Kshatriya spirit is like this. If, however, you do not perform your religious duty of fighting, then you will certainly incur sins for neglecting your duties and thus lose your reputation as a fighter. People will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectable person, dishonor is worse than death. The great generals who have esteemed your name and fame will think that you have left the battlefield out of fear only, and thus they will consider you insignificant. Your enemies will describe you in many unkind words and scorn your ability. What could be more painful for you? O son of Kunti, either you will be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy the earthly kingdom. Therefore, get up and fight with determination. So the important part of this passage is actually in the very first verse of the passage. This is 231. So Sva-dharma api cha aveksha. So he says, let us consider this situation in terms of your Sva-dharma. So this is a very super important word. It's going to come up throughout the entirety of the Gita as an important thing. So it has to be understood. Let us consider the situation in terms of your Sva-dharma. So the word dharma is a little bit hard to translate. It's usually translated as religion, or sometimes it's translated as duty. But the word dharma also means the nature of a thing. So for example, the dharma of fire is hot. The dharma of water as well. Okay, you're just going to take out my script. It's my you're stealing my script here. Okay, I'm gonna go through a few other ones you didn't mention yet. The dharma of salt is salty. And the dharma of sugar? Okay, so dharma means the nature of a thing. So everything has its dharma. Money has its dharma. Power has its dharma. Therefore, you have statements like absolute power corrupts absolutely. That means that that's the dharma of power, and the especially for conditioned souls, when they get power, they go a little crazy. Money has its dharma. It changes your mind in a very peculiar sort of way. Just like I've shared this before, when you don't have any money, you always think to yourself that you will be very charitable. When you're broke, you always think, I'll be very charitable, I'll give so nicely. And then when you actually get money, because money has its dharma, something happens to your mind, it changes all of a sudden. I also give, I want to do this first, do that thing first, do that thing first. Isn't it? You have this experience? Being broke and thinking, I'll be so charitable when I get money. And when you get money, charity is happening. So that's because money has its dharma also. So everything has its dharma in this world. And bodies, and this is one that's a little bit more challenging for people to process. Bodies also have their dharma. So a snake, the dharma of a snake is there, right? The snake is known to be a creature that is just envious and will strike for no reason it will strike you. There's a dharma of a snake. Kaliya in Krishna's pastime, he prays to Krishna, like, listen, I mean, you chastise me for being envious, but it's kind of like the dharma of a snake. I can't just give it up. It's not so easy. Jai. So bodies have their dharma also. The dharma of a mosquito. You can't have a conversation with a mosquito. Can you please just I'm trying to go to sleep, man. Can you not bite me? Can you not fly around my head right when I'm trying to sleep? You can't have a conversation because the mosquito has its dharma. So it will bite you whether you have conversation with it or not. Even if it could speak English, the mosquito say, I know, man, I don't want to bite you, but I just can't help it. Because that is the dharma of a mosquito. It has to bite. So objects have their dharma, and bodies also have their dharma. So man has its dharma, woman has its dharma, everything has its dharma in this world. So the dharma means the nature of a thing, and Sva-dharma, the word Sva means one's own. So Sva-dharma means one's own nature. So in this context, it refers to the system which is known as, we call it varna-dharma. This is another word that appears. In context of what this means here, the word varna is generally translated as occupational duty. And there's usually understood to be 4 occupations. The intellectual occupation, we'll call it intellectual. Don't mind the spelling, y'all. This is known as brahmana. Well, you have how do you put the next one? Warrior, administrator.
Yeah.
I like warrior is a little bit more clear.
Yeah.
I'm going to put warrior. Yeah. Ksatriya. Sorry, I'm just going to write this out real quick. Martially spirited.
I like that.
Martially spirited?
Yeah, because for nowadays, it's not warrior, it's people who are martial, they're going to get things.
Okay. Anyway, y'all get the essence there. Yes, that's a good one. I'll keep that in mind. Language is always nice. It gives some clarity. And then you have the business guy, the merchant. Let's call this vaisya. And then you have the laborer. Call this the sudras. So we all live in the ashram together, and we're very shady towards each other. So at any time they're laughing something, that means one of them says something shady to the other one, and then everyone is laughing about it. So if you're trying to understand what's going on, that's what's happening there. If you stick around with us long enough, you'll get part of the Bob also, shady comments flying across the room and so on. So Sva-dharma here refers to varna-dharma. And varna-dharma means the occupational duty in society. So you'll hear this a lot in the Gita, but basically If you look at anyone in society, they can fall into one of these 4 categories, more or less. Someone has an intellectual temperament to their conditioning. Someone has a martially spirited temperament to their conditioning. Like they just ready to fight. You have friends like that. They just have that spirit. Some have a business. They look at anything in the environment. They know how to make money out of it. There's just something about their psychology. And then there are those who just, they're either, labor is not always the best word. Artist also falls under Sudra. There are persons who are artistic, who just like doing hard work, or they're creative in some way. They're called as Shudras. So these are the basic type of psychology types that you see in the world. And the psychology type is a good word to think about it, because the word varna also means color. So someone has a yellow coloring to their psychology. Someone has a red coloring to their psychology. Someone has a blue color to their psychology. So according to the color of your psychology, then certain duties were prescribed to that color, so to speak. So if you had a yellow color into your psychology, then you should do yellow occupational duties. If you had a blue color into your psychology, you should do blue occupational duties. So when you perform the duties that were corresponding to your psychological conditioning or color, then that was called a Sva-dharma. Sva-dharma means according to your psychology, you should perform that particular type of activity. So Arjuna, he specifically has this warrior or martially spirited psychology. We'll call it as the red. Red is like passionate. So we'll call it the red coloring. He has the red varna. And therefore with a red varna, he should do red work. He's confused about what is my duty. Now the confusion is because of the internal conflict. When you're having a problem with your identity, that often impacts you externally as well. So he's confused about what he's supposed to do. So Krishna's just saying, you have a red psychology, you should do the red dharma. So the word here is, and I like this point also, Sva-dharma apicha aveksha. So let's consider the subject matter according to Sva-dharma. One interesting point here that I do have in my notes is that in the first instance, Krishna is considering the situation from the perspective of what's called as Atma Tattva, the truth concerning the soul. And now he said, now let us consider the subject matter in terms of duty. Nowhere is he saying, let us consider the subject matter in terms of your feelings. I wanted to point that out here, which is very interesting. That he's, you can see just what the culture values. He's not saying that like you're going through a lot of this turmoil, so let's talk about it. Not again, I don't want to say there is no place for that. I do like to pinch on this point. But you can see that the consideration is based on spirituality or based on your responsibilities, not based on your feelings. And the reason for that, as we've described, is because feelings are very unpredictable and they're very misleading. Why are they unpredictable? Because you have all these impressions in your mind coming from God knows where. For example, you had a bad experience of a religious person in this life or some previous life, and it's just sitting there as a bad imprint in your mind. And then you see someone, let's say you see a Hare Krishna, but like full-blown Hare Krishna, with the Sika, like the Afro Sika is like kind of sticking up and coming to the side a little bit. Got the war paint on and the saffron sheets on, and they're coming, Hare Krishna, and then they hand you a book, and you have this bad impression of a religious person. And so when you see that impression gets triggered, and then you impose that impression onto that funny-looking Hare Krishna devotee, and then you say, I don't want to have anything to do with this person. Not because of that person, but because of you. Because of what's going on internally, that psychology. So feelings are like that. They're very unpredictable. All of a sudden, you don't like something. All of a sudden, you get attached to something. Because you have these impressions that are just getting triggered by your different circumstances in life. Therefore, the feelings were not given that much value because they're unpredictable. And they often go against that which is conducive for your further development. Even on the material platform, what to speak of spiritually. So I just thought it was interesting that he says, now let us consider the subject matter in terms of Sva-dharma. We've considered it in terms of Atma Tattva, but now we're going to consider it in terms of responsibility. And Arjuna was like, well, what about my feelings? And it's like, that is, if he would have said that, Krishna would have been, what is this word? Nonplussed? I like this word. Nonplussed. I like that. That's a cool word. Nonplussed means, one of these things. If Arjuna said, well, what about my feelings? Krishna, your feelings. Your feelings, again, just make it clear that we're not saying your feelings are all horrible or something. But if you're in a state of unenlightenment, so the feelings aren't necessarily unenlightened and therefore often distracting from further progress internally and externally. So let us consider the subject matter. Now he's saying here, for Kshatriya like you, there exists no better duty than fighting for religious principles. Therefore, why should you hesitate in the performance of this duty? So he just made it very simple. You have red color, you should do red dharma. What is this? There need be no hesitation. Again, the ethical problem that Arjuna suffered, I don't know what I should do. Krishna's like, what do you mean you don't know what you should do? You have red color, you do red activity. What is the difficulty? I like to put up one other issue here, just for the sake of clarification. In the Kali Yuga, in our present situation, many of us, or all of us, or most of us, are not one color. We don't have one varna. So this dharma samudachetaha is actually a very big problem for us, not knowing what I should do. In fact, maybe even most of you here, I don't know what I should do with my life. That is often, a big question that comes up when I've heard this question so many. What should I do with my life? I'm still trying to figure it out. Maybe for those of you who suffered college and survived, or maybe didn't survive, or maybe you came out of it but you broke. I mean, whatever. For those of you who went through that, I saw this with so many students when I was doing college programs for about 8 years in Chicago. How they would always wait to choose their major, like at the very last. I think you had until the end of sophomore year to choose, to claim a major. And almost everyone would just wait till the very end of sophomore year, and then they were like, okay, communications. That was a good one. I actually saw that many times, people going into communications because they didn't know what to do. So why does that confusion come up of not knowing what to do? That's because in Kali Yuga, our varna is not fixed. So in the previous human society, this is a kind of a side point, but it's a point that Arjuna makes, and this is in his arguments in chapter 1. And so I'm kind of bringing it up because it's in relationship to the topic. And in old Vedic culture especially, they used to breed humanity. That sounds very horrible, but I like to use that word because it sounds horrible, just to create an imprint. They were very conscientious about their mating. They didn't just come together out of love. They saw having children as a duty for the future, which kind of makes sense and kind of seems reasonable. That we have a duty to the future of the world. And so we have to bring in proper children who can responsibly engage with the world in a way that's helpful externally and also ultimately internally. So they would make sure that people of the same varna would come together so that they would produce a child of the same color or the same varna. And that way you made sure that you had a community of intellectuals, you had a community of warriors, you had a community of artists or laborers, you had a community of vaisyas. And they would only usually get with someone of the same varna. Because if you get with someone of a different varna out of love or, whatever, attachment, infatuation, then you produce children with different varnas inside of their minds. So let's say someone with a yellow and let's say an intellectual and an artist. So they'll be intellectual, but they won't be as intellectual as the purebred intellectuals. They'll be artistic, but they won't be as artistic as the purebred artists. So what happens is they start to create their own niche communities because they don't really fit in here or there. And then they start to destroy all of the old sorts of systems that were in place because they don't feel that they have a place in those systems. That kind of sounds like you can get a little insight about our political situation and why the infatuation with destroying systems and so on, because of the confusion that's taking place inside the mixture of the varnas. So the dharma samudachetaha that Arjuna is talking about, the confusion about what should be done, is something that you can see is acutely felt by our generation, because many of us or all of us are the products of generations and generations and generations of mixture. So we have all this mixture going on, and therefore we can't figure out what we are, who we are, what we want to be. And then it ends up producing something like a non-binary category, for example, which no one knows what that is. It's neither here nor there. For example, why these sorts of things come up, because of the psychology is so mixed, it's very bewildering. And add that with all the body hopping that the soul does also, it becomes out of control. So let us consider this in terms of your Sva-dharma. Now, Krishna, this is the main point of the passage. Some final points here. Arjuna had made an argument that if I fight in the war, I will be committing sin. So Krishna in this passage in verse 33 and 34, he says, actually, if you perform your dharma according to your varna, then you actually don't get sin, especially for kshatriya, you'll get heaven. And to not perform your dharma, you actually get sin. So he's just dismantling all of Arjuna's arguments, which were based on his emotions, not based on actual knowledge or reason of the culture of that time. So he said, actually, you get sins by not performing your dharma. And if you perform your dharma, you're able to enjoy in heaven. So even from that consideration, this is the best thing you could be doing, to do your duty. And then furthermore, as a kshatriya, you have the big ego. And kshatriyas, warriors, they don't like to be slighted, even a little bit. We hear the story of boy Dhruva. He was 5 years old. His mother slighted him in one way, and he went off to the forest for 6 months to realize God, just so he can get a kingdom bigger than his father's, so he can get back at his stepmother for slighting him. That kshatriya psychology is like really intense. And so even you see it with male ego also, even though it's not so much today, because anyway, I'm thinking something that everyone might not like, but go for it, you can see that, but you can see it even with male egos. If you slight them a little bit, immediately, that anger comes out. Just like here in the ashram, we joke with each other all the time, but because we also males and we have sensitive egos, sometimes we step over the line a little bit, and then we like at the eating process, like, don't talk to me, man. It's like a very serious thing, because that ego. So Krishna is also giving this is actually a very materialistic argument, but he's just smashing Arjuna's statement. He said, for a kshatriya like you will be dishonored if you give up your duty. Now, in our culture, even the word duty might not be known. Like, I had to look up the word duty when I first read Prabhupada's books. I was like, duty? What's duty? Like, Google. What's duty? Oh, okay. I kind of get what that is. But because we don't have a culture of that, it's very, this is another side point, but with knowledge, you need culture to actually understand knowledge. Part of learning is just hearing like what we're doing now. But to really understand it, you need the culture that supports the knowledge. So even hearing the word duty, you kind of get a sense of what it is. But because we didn't experience a culture where people were dutiful, I didn't really know what it is to be dutiful. But in these old cultures, everything was about duty. And so if you didn't do your duty, all these proper persons, they will make fun of you. And Arjuna may argue, well, no, I'm doing this out of compassion. He said they will not consider that. They'll think you're just out of cowardice or abandoning your duty or out of fear. And they'll make fun of you. And one of the verses, 36, Krishna said, they'll make fun of you, avyayam, forever. I thought that was pretty funny reading it. Avyayam means imperishable or forever. So they'll make fun of you forever. Like, no one's ever going to forget this. And so this is to excite the kshatriya spirit that doesn't like to be slighted. This would be worse than death for you. And therefore, with all these considerations in place, you should do your duty. You have a red psychology, you should do red dharma. You'll get heaven, and if you die, you'll get heaven. If you live, you'll get the planet here. And therefore, what is the confusion? Dharma samudachetaha satisfied. No ethical problem finished. Of course, now in the next passage, we'll stop now, but in the next passage, Krishna will now combine the two ideas. This is very systematic how Krishna is presenting it. First, he's talked about the self, and now he's talking about duty. And now the very next section, he was not going to combine the two ideas. How do you do how do you do your duty, which involves action in the world in a spiritual way, like with this knowledge of Atma taught in the previous passage. So here in this passage 31 through 37, he's just given kind of like the material idea. But now how do you do that duty with spiritual consciousness? And that would be the whole thrust of actually that's the whole thrust of the 6 chapters coming up, the first 6 chapters. How do you live in the world in a spiritual way? That will be the question that Krishna is going to explore for the next 6 chapters. So these are all the points here I tried to cover. Are there any questions about this? There was only one question on the questionnaire that I'm trying to complete. And that question is, what is Sva-dharma and why is it important to understand? So if you want to work on that, you can do that. Otherwise, we'll take questions. Yeah, Kishore. And then,
in terms of the psychology of our nature, psychology in and of itself tends to get a bad rap in the devotional community. Largely in the sense of like counseling and that kind of stuff, which is understandable. But this kind of psychology is a little more mechanical in the sense of it's more the practical application of it and how it applies to life. So, how do you see, in today's society, how do you see somebody, finding the Dharma or becoming aware of it?
How do I see someone in today's society finding their Dharma and becoming aware of it? Yeah.
I can take this last part.
Well, what is the importance of kind of like finding out what you are? Like, what is the Sva-dharma of the body that you're inhabiting? And the body means the body and mind. Like the question is, what is Sva-dharma and why is it important? So,
isn't it a thing which will automatically pop out?
So there's one concept that's like this. If you get purified, it automatically pops out. Okay, based on what I presented today, it's a hard thing to explore in Kali Yuga. Again, because of the problem of humans coming together out of love. And I really want to press on that point, that because of that infatuation with the attachment aspect and people coming together, not in consideration of the children that will come out of that union and the sort of psychology that they have. And with us being a product of generations and generations of this sort of type of coming together, it is very hard to understand psychology of ourselves. And although it is important to understand your Sva-dharma, actually, because you cannot be peaceful. And when you're not peaceful, it's very hard to apply spiritual disciplines. As Krishna says later on in the Gita, na cha bhavayata shanta ashanta shakuta sukham. He says that, ashanta shakuta sukham, without peace, where is happiness? Where is happiness without peace? And when you're struggling with yourself internally here means not your soul, but your psychology, not knowing what you are, who you are, what you're supposed to be, then you can't be peaceful. And with that lack of peace, it's very hard to apply spiritual disciplines. The challenge is that finding out what we are as products of generations of mixture is very difficult. I think a lot of us, we probably have elements of all of these things in one sense because there's so much mixture going on. But some of these things may be more prominent. And because of the prominence in our mind, we may come to discover that that's more closer to our Sva-dharma and identify with that. And then, let's say, choose some occupation or some life trajectory based on that. And that will help us be peaceful. And then with that peace, we can also apply our spiritual disciplines in a healthy way. So I personally understand it to be important just because it's needed kind of for a lot of us to be peaceful, to apply spirituality. At the same time, I think that we have to be careful not to become overly preoccupied with trying to figure it out, because it may be impossible to a certain degree to actually figure it out. And to just, do something that kind of helps you gain some peace of mind and kind of like some steadiness internally, like mentally, and then just focus on the culture of spiritual development. That's how I personally see it. I know there are different schools of thought about this in our own community or family, but just been my personal observation. I see devotees who have gone to counseling, have gone to devotees, and the years and years and years is going into figure, and they can't figure it out. They're just having a hard time. So we don't want to become overly preoccupied with that, because it may not be possible to get a crystal clear picture of the Sva-dharma. But you may get enough to say, like, okay, I can. This is making me peaceful. It gives me something worthy to do in the world, and I'll do that. And now I'm peaceful. I can apply spiritual discipline without much complication, without feeling that sort of emptiness that comes from not feeling connected to your dharma, your like that. So I do see it as important, but I also see it as very hard to decipher. And so one has to be careful not to become overly preoccupied with trying to figure it out. That's my personal take on that. Yes.
I have a question, and it's probably not my question alone. I'm a product of this mixed up, adharmic kind of world.
Yes.
So when I hear Arjuna being told by Krishna that, so if you fight and you are killed, you'll go to heaven because you're a kshatriya. And if you are victorious, then you'll dominate on the earth, which is like heaven on earth. And I'm thinking, I can see where that applies to Arjuna with my conditioning. You know, I think, yes, because Arjuna is a good guy. But what about Duryodhana? If he prevails, he's a stinker. Why should he enjoy heaven on earth? And if he's vanquished, why shouldn't he go to hell? Because he's been hellishly hell-bent on disturbing other people, treating them badly. So it doesn't seem just, the idea that just because you're following your nature, then you're going to be promoted to heaven, either on earth or in the afterlife.
So the word kshatriya means one who protects from harm. So Krishna is saying, if you perform your duty as a kshatriya, so the pious function of that duty, then the gates of heaven are open. But if you're going against the pious application of that dharma, you're being vicious, then you will suffer the appropriate consequences as well. So it's not like if you're irresponsibly performing the dharma, you'll also get heaven. So every action has this congruent fruit. So if you're doing vicious action, you'll get a bitter fruit. And if you're doing virtuous action, you'll get a sweet fruit. So it is not expected that Duryodhana will get a sweet fruit from vicious activities. But he's saying for Arjuna, you should do your duty, and the pious function, the virtuous function of that duty, then you will get heaven. And for the kshatriya, this is very glorious thing. Like this. Yes.
So if you take the classic definition of the dharma,
Yes.
brahmana, kshatriya, vaisya, each one has like different responsibilities.
Yes.
And they're much more elaborate. Like if
Yes.
you're brahmana, the overhead is a lot.
Yes.
Right? So but in this day and age, it is difficult to execute your duties as a brahmana, right? Or even as a kshatriya.
Yeah.
But I think in the bhakti tradition, it is recommended that you don't need to do all of that. Just do the Nama Sankirtan.
Yeah. Chant Hare Krishna, Hare
Chant
Krishna.
Hare Krishna and follow the regulative principles. So do you still think that whatever the prescribed duties are there, which are there like in the original thing, do they still apply in this day and age, given that everything is mixed up?
Do they still apply? Not so much, because of this mixture problem, because of the culture not being scientifically organized in terms of these considerations. Just like going into school, right? Going to school, everyone has to learn everything. What a disaster situation. Everyone has to learn everything. So yeah, I used to see this all the time when I was in school. I'm gonna call them the ghetto kids. The ghetto kids were a huge rubric of people of all demographics, but they were all ghetto. And they just couldn't perform well in certain classes. It was just like not possible. I remember having these nightmarish experiences where they would make all the kids go around and read, like one or two sentences of a book. And this is like the fifth grade or something, 5th or 6th grade. And they would get to one of these ghetto kids and they couldn't read. And then we were all going to the same schools, but somehow they couldn't read. And it would take the rest of us like 30 seconds to read. It would take them like 5 minutes or something. And and you couldn't make fun of them because that was your behind after the class. So there was nothing like joking. You better not, snicker or make some funny glance. You just sat there like, and if you wanted to laugh, you held it. Because you would be in trouble after the class, And they just couldn't perform well in the class. And then some other kids, they would just prosper in that. Then these same kids would take like a class like physical education, gym. They would just like prosper like anything, And now kids who were functioning well in this other class, they would just get smashed by these kids because they had different varnas. But these education system, the society at large, they don't make considerations in terms of people's psychology, what they are. There's this saying, is it attributed to Einstein? Something to the fact that everyone has some glory, but if you make a fish or an elephant try to climb a tree, then he won't.
He'll always think that he's not intelligent.
Is this Einstein? Is attributed to him?
It's attributed to him, but
They attribute to it, but probably not.
It's probably like some old wisdom saying from like, so like this is a varna system. They would make consideration in that. This one's an elephant, this one's a monkey, this one's a fish. So give this one monkey business, give this one elephant business, and give this one fish business. They would make Now they don't do that. So without the scientific organization, with all the mixture in place, and with the just general erosion of social integrity today, it's not functioning very nicely. It's still there to some degree. Like I said, you'll still see elements of this in society, for sure. And I suspect that most of us, or a lot of us, have a mixture of probably all these types, with one of the types being very prominent in our psychology. And so we kind of move in that particular direction. But with society not being organized in this scientific way, you kind of have to just figure out how to, even if you were purely into how do I exist in a society that's based on just money and economics and so on, it doesn't really have a place for like Brahmin sort of persons, how you think of a Brahmin traditionally. So that is the glory of Kali Yuga, actually.
Well, in India, a lot of people still marry within the caste.
That has no meaning. No, I see like so many of you boys come from India. You say I am Brahmin, but a black guy is teaching you Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
So what is the meaning of that?
That's why I'm asking, like, what is the actual duty?
Huh?
You get confused, like what is that?
Yeah, so in the age of Kali, it is very hard to understand this Sva-dharma as we're hearing about it now. So we're giving the context in terms of Bhagavad Gita. But we'll get to this later. Okay, we can get to it now. There's one other point here. In the commentary that Prabhupada offers for this particular verse, this is verse 3:231. There's another Sva-dharma. So there's a Sva-dharma of the soul also. Right? The word, again, dharma just means the nature of a thing and one's own nature. So right now we're hearing about the Sva-dharma in terms of the Sva-dharma of the body. And then there's also the Sva-dharma of the actual self, the Atman. And so that Sva-dharma of the Atman is intrinsic. It exists at all times, as the soul is existing at all times. The Sva-dharma of the body does not exist at all times for the soul. It only exists for as long as that soul is in that particular body. So therefore, the Sva-dharma of the actual soul can be accessed at any time. And of course, in the Bhakti tradition, we say you access that just by chanting Hare Krishna and hearing about Krishna. That is activities of the soul, or the Sva-dharma of the soul, which is accessible at any time. And as far as the Sva-dharma of the material body is concerned, that may be not possible because of certain external situations not making it easy to do and so on. And so with that, that's what we're hearing about. It'd be kind of difficult to figure that out. So we say you practice the Sva-dharma of the soul. And as far as the Sva-dharma of the body is concerned, you can try to figure out what it is to whatever degree you're able to do that. And choose something that allows you to be peaceful, but mostly peaceful enough so you can apply the Sva-dharma of the soul. And this is the actual benediction of Kali Yuga. That it breaks down the bodily situation stuff so much that it is almost forcing you to identify with higher spiritual things if you're trying to actually progress spiritually. Because the bodily situation is becoming so confusing, so much eroded, that now if you want to actually uplift, you have to just take shelter of the actual true nature of the self. So this is why it's said that, what is that verse? Kalem swabhajanti arya gunagya sarabhagina. The sages say that the Aryan sages, They say that they glorify Kali Yuga as the best of all the yugas. Gunagya Sarabhagina, because they know the Gunagya means they have knowledge of what's good quality. And when they see this Kali Yuga, they say, yeah, this is good quality. It's destroying everything. And now they are forced to identify with their actual spiritual nature. And in that way, it is glorified like this. So this is the best we could do with that.
Yeah. The Sva-dharma of the soul is, that is like the main essence.
Yeah, that is fixed. So yes, Tiffany, we'll take a few more questions. Yeah, because I saw Kevin sign up too. Yeah.
So it's funny that this is the verse that we're working on. Yesterday I had a really, really like a really interesting experience. I was on the bus. I was heading to. I'm a teacher. I teach children mostly, and I was heading to teach at a preschool, one of my preschool sites, and I was on the bus, and this woman had her infant in a carriage and her toddler with her, and I've never seen such horrific abuse in my life ever. I mean, the kid was just trying to get her attention, and she grabbed him and snatched him so hard to sit out to the seat that he bashed his head against the back of the seat.
God.
He's screaming in agony, and she's just like not paying him any mind. She's on her phone. You can tell she was like not well. And me and other people on the bus were just like in shock. Like, what can you possibly do? And so, as a teacher, my dharma, right? My dharma as a teacher, my dharma is to work with children. So I was burning on the inside. Like when I tell you I never experienced like sadness and rage all at once in that form. And so it continued. She gets to the back of the bus and it just continues. And now at this point, she's right behind me. And in my mind, I'm internally battling with, do I say something? Do I say something? Is it going to be worth it for me to even say something? But how can I dare call myself a teacher and a lover of children if I do not at least speak the truth? At least. And then I'm battling internally. I'm like, it's my business. And in this culture, one of the breakdowns of Kali Yuga is that, you know, it used to be back in the old days, it takes a village, right? That old proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. Now it's everybody mind your business, don't tell no mama how to raise your children. And it's like, but just because you birthed it doesn't really mean you know what you're doing.
No.
And that's okay. You need support from the outside world. So there's this culture, right? And it really upsets me because I'm just like, no, that's not. How do you put your kid in school for 8 hours and expect that you're the only one who knows everything? That is completely illogical. So I'm battling internally. And then she did something else that just, I snapped, I lost it. And so I turned around, and anyone who knows me personally knows that I can be really sharp at the tongue, but it comes from a really burning place in my heart. And probably forgive me for saying this in front of you, but I said to her, I looked her in the eye and I said, if you didn't want to have children, you should have kept your legs closed. That's a disgusting way to treat a child, especially a child that you birth. And of course, she loses it. She loses it. And me and her were going back and forth on the bus. So now in my head, like, oh God, what did I start? But I couldn't, you know, it was an internal battle because I couldn't not say anything. Like, I could not, like, watching this baby, he had this huge scratch under his eye. And I said, if she's treating him like this in public, I can't imagine what she's doing to him at home. And this little boy was no older than 3 years old. I mean, like, I just couldn't take it. I couldn't. And so, you know, she eventually, Krsna had his ways because she got him on the next stop that we were already on the way to. I don't know where I would have gone from there if she didn't get off the bus, but she said something to the effect of, women like you, get hurt. And I said, no, women like you go to hell because you have a child that you don't deserve and you can't take care of. And I'm looking at, you know, I'm listening to the discussion and I'm like, wow, like, was it, because then she got off and I was so angry, I just started crying. And then this other woman who witnessed the same thing started crying. And then it became this discussion amongst a bunch of Dominican doñas having a discussion of like, how is it that children get into the care of these horrific people who have no business mothering. And, you know, it just became like this. And I was like, nobody on this bus is saying anything because they can't feel like they can say anything because you're probably out of your mind, you know. And so I had this moment of like, did I just make it worse for that kid? Like, because obviously you don't, you know, anyone who knows a bit of psychology knows you have to be mentally unstable to be able to treat your own flesh and blood that way. in public. You know, so in my head, I thought, I probably just exasperated the issue. She's probably gonna continue taking out whatever other anger she has on the inside of her from whatever childhood she lived, from whatever past life she had, and is gonna continue to take it out on this poor little soul. And so I thought, wow, like in my heart, I'm fulfilling my dharma by speaking the truth, but did I just overstep my dharmic boundaries, right? Like, is there boundaries? Like, are there?
Of course.
Because then I was also just, because everyone on the bus saw this and everyone was just kind of in shock. But it's again, we live in a society where people see the most horrific things all the time and we're desensitized. Like, Kali Yuga is just so out of control that we're just desensitized to everything now. We see things and it's just like, oh, well, especially if you're a devotee, it's like spiritual bypassing. Like, oh, Kali Yuga, sorry, bro. Oh, dang, you're dying like right now? Okay, well, let me finish these rounds and then I'm gonna call 911 for you. Like, we're so detached. We're so, so I was battling internally with like, did I overstep my dharmic duties? And then I had to come up the bus and like call my mom in tears and, Mom, thank you for like, being the mother that you were, despite all of our issues that we had as being a teenager after what I just saw. I then walked into my next preschool class within 10 minutes later with this whole, like, fresh new set of eyes looking at each and every one of these little babies as so precious. And I've always seen them that way, but I saw them even more precious at that moment more than ever after what I just witnessed. So I guess I'm just reflecting kind of on this verse and this set of verses and that experience I had yesterday, because I was really having an internal battle. Whether I fulfilled my dharma or I just used my ego to kind of lash out at someone for not doing theirs.
Dharma Samudhi Chaita, it's very hard to understand these things, especially in Kali Yuga. We'll take Kevin. It's just because I saw your hand was up before.
I guess to go off of what Tiffany was saying, like, it's just interesting to see, like, you were saying this before, it's good to try and know what our Sva-dharma is, but it's very complicated, and it's not so good, I think you were saying, to obsess over these kinds of things as well. However, I think that, like, we live in a society that, I mean, at least, like, I was just thinking about, like, all these personality tests, like the Enneagram, and like so many people are into that, so many devotees are into that, Myers-Briggs, and all this stuff that you could do to like try and figure out what kind of person you are, and like what kind of person you should be with, and what your fears are, and etc., and all this stuff. And I feel like I've definitely had moments where like I've been like, oh, because I've taken all those tests. So I think like I've had those moments where I'm like, oh, like I know that like my type of person should be reacting in this kind of situation in this certain way, and like I feel that reaction coming up. But then again, with like what Tiffany was saying about like being a devotee, there's kind of, I don't know if it's an indifference, but there's kind of like this separation now of just like, well, karma and whatever, chant Hare Krishna, Harinam, Sankirtan. I used to be a social worker for many years, and I was faced with many situations like this, where like I had like a very visceral, emotional kind of reaction to it, and I felt like that was my dharmic duty to be with these people. And now, much more in devotional life, like that's kind of almost just not there anymore, at least very little. So I guess like,
oh no, devotion's making you evil. You often hear this from devotees, like, before I became a devotee, I was having like all these feelings, and afterwards, I'm just like steady now. I personally have the same experience.
So I guess my question was like, this dharma of the soul and dharma of the body, like where is the line?
So that's where this is actually what Bhagavad Gita is concerned about, and especially the first 6 chapters. So how do you bridge the gap between your spiritual knowledge and your action in the world? So that is this is what Krishna is going to be preoccupied with most of the first 6 chapters. This as a short preview. The message is very simple from Krishna, more or less. Do your duty dispassionately. Something has to be done because it is your duty. You have this body, you have the dharma of that body is there. If some activity should be performed, but it should be done dispassionately with the perspective of the soul. That ultimately the soul is different from this world, and the soul has minimum degree of influence on the situations that are happening in this world. So you should do your duty. Some duty has to be done, whether it's fighting or it's defending children or whatever, it should be done, but it has to be done without losing sight of the soul. Because that's what the material world is always doing. It invites us to lose sight of ourselves by providing us with all sorts of tempting scenarios that causes us to lose sight of ourselves. For some of us, it can be just drinking and lust, and for some of us, it's fighting for justice. But in both cases, parties are losing sight of their soul. So Krishna is advising us to perform action in such a way that we don't lose sight of our souls, because life has an ultimate purpose. And however virtuous the act is in the world, the ultimate purpose isn't that virtuous act in the world. The ultimate purpose is something spiritual. So we have some duty, we should perform it, but it should be done dispassionately, because only from a state of dispassion can you maintain your vision of the actual self in that situation. Otherwise, you're just fired up and you just lose yourself, as we've experienced many times. So that would be, you'll see, this would be the basic verb of Krishna's teaching throughout the first 6 chapters. Obviously, a lot harder to practice because the life is always presenting very tempting scenarios, and it takes us by surprise. You're ready, like, I'm ready for Maya to come in this particular way, but she come in another way. She's sneaky. I'm like, boy, he ready for me over there. So let me come over here. So she clever like that. So it is very difficult to practice because of that. So therefore, if anything, the encouragement is also to regularly hear Bhagavad Gita and to regularly contemplate. Start your day off with, as we do, japa and spiritual teaching, so that you can be centered in that vision of the self as you move about in the world. That's basically the art. Krishna will even use this language, yoga karma sukhoshama. It says this is the art of work, how to move in this world without losing sight of yourself. It's like it's like you can imagine like walking on a tightrope. How do you walk on the tightrope without losing sight of the goal? I've heard, I've never tried it, but if you're walking on a tightrope, you have to just look at your goal. Don't look left, don't look right. Just look straight ahead and walk. I can imagine it's still very difficult. So you can imagine that's what Krishna's also asking us to do. The world is tempting us to look left, to look right. And if we do so, we lose sight of our souls and we become lost. So this is the main thrust we'll see the teaching. Very nice, very challenging for sure. Okay, we're going to stop there. It's 15 minutes over, but thank you so much for your pleasant participation today. Hariom Tat Sat, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Namaste, Hare Krishna. Okay, let me end it. I'm surprised people are staying on.